If you've been on the internet lately, you've seen the outrage over India's Great Nicobar Project. Critics are labeling the 81,000 crore rupee development an ecological disaster, demanding an immediate cancellation to protect the island's rainforests and indigenous tribes. To understand why the project is moving forward, we have to look past the island to India's domestic supply chain. Currently, 75% of India's transshipment cargo cannot dock at home, meaning it must route through foreign ports in Colombo or Singapore first. This dependency costs Indian traders an estimated 100 crore rupees every year in extra logistical fees paid directly to foreign operators. Saving those fees alone would take centuries to pay back the project's massive budget. However, the economic argument is secondary to a far more urgent catalyst: an existential geopolitical threat forming just off India's coastline. Judging the Nicobar project purely by its local environmental impact ignores the strategic vacuum opening up across the wider Indian Ocean. This map illustrates the String of Pearls, a calculated, decades-long strategy used by China to quietly encircle the Indian peninsula with naval infrastructure. China has established specific maritime outposts at Djibouti in Africa, Gwadar in Pakistan, and Hambantota in Sri Lanka. The eastern side of the loop is closing at Kyaukphyu in Myanmar and the Coco Islands. Satellite imagery reveals that China has constructed runways and advanced radar facilities on these islands, just kilometers from Indian territory. The force backing these outposts is significant. The People's Liberation Army Navy is now numerically larger than the US Navy, operating more warships and carrying more warheads. This presence is already active. Chinese research vessels constantly patrol the region, and underwater sensors shaped like torpedoes have been discovered monitoring Indian missile tests and gathering intelligence. The Indian Ocean has become an actively contested battle space where India is currently outflanked. The Great Nicobar Project is a heavily fortified, dual-use military installation designed to counter this encirclement. Along with the deep-sea port, the blueprints include an international airport designed to host long-range military patrol aircraft. This provides the Indian Navy with a permanent platform to monitor regional waters. The southern tip of the Nicobar Islands sits 148 kilometers away from the Indonesian coast. This gap borders the Strait of Malacca, a corridor where 30 to 40% of all global container traffic must pass to move between the Indian and Pacific Oceans. By placing a military installation on the edge of this choke point, India wedges itself into the global supply chain, turning a geographic vulnerability into strategic leverage. This leverage point targets the Malacca dilemma, a strategic weakness that complicates Chinese maritime security. China is the world's largest oil importer. 80% of its oil supply must pass through the Strait of Malacca to sustain its economy. Former Chinese President Hu Jintao officially recognized this vulnerability, stating on the record that a foreign naval blockade at this strait could cripple China's energy security. The Nicobar base establishes a credible deterrent. Any military aggression against India carries the risk of an immediate energy blockade at Malacca. The history of Diego Garcia, a US military base in the Indian Ocean, demonstrates the risks of leaving strategic islands undeveloped. Between 1965 and 1973, the UK and US cleared the island for military use by cutting off food supplies and forcibly displacing thousands of indigenous Chagos Islanders. Superpowers require physical footholds in the Indian Ocean to project power and control trade routes. If the geography is vital, local sovereignty is often ignored. Unlike the displacement at Diego Garcia, India is developing its own territory. This project is intended to protect Indian citizens and secure the border, rather than leaving the land vulnerable to foreign seizure. Unprotected territory in a strategic corridor creates a vacuum that foreign powers will eventually fill by force. The Great Nicobar Project requires an ecological sacrifice. While the environmental concerns are significant, the development is framed as a necessary step to avoid a far more destructive regional conflict. The US and China are currently preparing for a potential conflict in the Indo-Pacific. When global powers clash, nations that lack defensive infrastructure often lose their independence. A global power must control its own strategic geography to maintain its military and economic autonomy. The Great Nicobar Project functions as a permanent strategic anchor, providing India with the leverage necessary to remain